John Roberts, may rest in peace, and Mickey Monday, probably the two greatest interviews in documentary history. How did you find them? And, how did that process start working with John and Mickey on Cocaine Cowboys?
Yeah, and I'd argue Jorge Riviala, George, aka George Rivera, the hitman who we interview in the latter half of the doc. Here's something interesting about it. So we started getting these, we got an angel investor on board because we pitched it everywhere. After Sundance, we could get interviews anywhere and everywhere. So, but in those days, you have to remember, there was gatekeepers, man. Like, this is right at the dawn of YouTube, barely at the dawn of YouTube, actually. YouTube launched in 04, 05, so, and certainly, Netflix was, just a DVD service, at that point. Cocaine Cowboys blew up at Netflix on the red envelope. Remember the red envelopes, coming in? Yeah. So
I had it.
Yeah. So we got it. We pitched City Made of Snow everywhere. But again, there was only 8 or 9 companies, theatrical distribution companies for documentaries. So those executives were the gatekeepers. If you could not penetrate or capture the imagination of that finite, very small number, not even double digits number of companies, you would get nowhere, and if you could not then get into a film festival, you got nowhere. There was no other way to kind of, go direct to your end user or your audience or, so we could not sell City Made of Snow. We could not get industry financing for it. Nobody got it. Everybody said, didn't we see this in Blow? Didn't we see this in Scarface? Wasn't this in Miami Vice? And we're like, yeah, but this is a documentary. How many times are you going to tell the Al Capone story or an Italian gangster story? This is a different, we obviously failed to, I don't know if they failed to get
it's real life. It's real life.
Yeah, we failed to pitch it, perhaps, but we could not get anybody interested. So we got an angel investor just to get started and to get those initial interviews in the can. And we knew pretty early, this was something kind of cool and special, and because of the content of those interviews, John's and Mickey's and Rivy's and even, the lawyers and the cops and the journalists that we interviewed, everything was it was wild. It was just, everybody was very raw and candid and it was really, really compelling stuff. And in fact, I'll tell you this, as we started to edit it, David Sipkin and I edited it in the second bedroom of my apartment in Miami. We converted it into an edit suite. He and I worked literally back to back. I would face one Final Cut Pro system. He would face the other, and we started editing this thing. And so there was a moment. This is wild. So there's a moment where we're in the edit, and we call up Alfred, our producing partner, and we say, okay, listen, we have the first cut, right? We have a rough cut. And Alfred says, how long is it? And I say, it's 3.5 hours. He goes, fuck you, keep cutting. And he hung up. And so Dave and I started cutting, and then we started talking, and then we started drinking and talking some more. And we called Alfred back within a day or two, and we said, listen, here's the thing. It's 4 hours long. It's not actually a feature documentary. I don't know if that means it's 2 2-hour docs or it's 4 1-hour docs, but the first half is about the cocaine boom, right? This industry and how it blows up and the money just pours into, this narco economy into Miami and helps build the city. Second half is basically the downfall. It's about the enforcement and the murderers that basically kill the golden goose, as Mickey Monday says in the documentary. So those are the two halves to the story. I said, so basically we talked about what that meant structurally and how we would introduce Rivy. We would hold Rivy and introduce the hitman in the second half rather than integrate him as a commentator in the first half. And honest to God, for the next day or two, we worked under the guise that this was the concept. And then I remember Alfred called and he said, listen, because, Dave and I handle the creative side of the business, whereas Alfred handles the business side of our company. And Alfred says, listen, it's hard enough to go out into the marketplace and sell one independent feature documentary. he said, we can't reinvent the wheel. There's no such thing as like a double feature or a doc mini series. He's like, there's no such thing as that. You know, he's like, we can't go out into the marketplace with something that's with an unsellable product. He said, let's just cut the best feature doc that we can. And then maybe there'll be opportunities in the future to do some ancillary projects or things with it. And so we went back to, cutting it down to 2 hours. And so, which we eventually did. But what's funny about that is flash forward, less than a decade. And we would go to buyers in the last few years with feature documentaries, and they would say to us, can this be 6 hours? Can this be 10 hours? So we practically invented the documentary miniseries in 2005, and nobody knows about it because we talked ourselves out of it, and which I thought was pretty funny. And then incredibly, when Cocaine Cowboys blew up in the bootleg market, which is where it first blew up, at the flea markets, at barbershops in Miami Gardens and Carol City and the Carol Mart and really very much in the hip hop community and the flea markets that would would perpetuate bootlegs. It went viral before viral was a thing. It went viral on DVD-Rs, on physical media. People told me that they ripped the bootleg and put an MP3 of the entire movie soundtrack, all 2 hours of it, on their iPod and would listen to it in the car. And years later, I'm like, we fucking invented fucking Audible and podcasts. That would have been like the first serialized, but we could have fucking made a podcast out of Cocaine Cowboy because it's nonstop talking, right? And music and stuff. So I was like, that's hilarious. We could have made it a podcast too. Holy shit.
Everything. I want to ask just one more thing for our listeners about the Rivi Ayala interview, which was done at the jail. For our listeners, how do you set up, and for myself, how do you set up an interview at a jail? How do they allow cameras in? How do they allow him to talk? Kind of just give us the brief story about that.
Federal prisons, the BOP, do not allow cameras or have not allowed cameras in their places since Timothy McVeigh was interviewed for like 60 minutes before his execution. And state prisons are a little bit different. There are individual, obviously, each of the different departments of corrections in different states have different policies. Then the wardens have a lot of power over determining who can and can't, and if we will or won't come into their institutions, and rightfully so. They're responsible for security there. And fortunately, we just encountered very willing and transparent Florida Department of Corrections in those days. I don't know what it's like now, but in those days, the public and the press had access to those institutions. So we arranged it through the Department of Corrections, and then more importantly through the wardens. And I think we may have shot, if I recall correctly, there was at least two, because we did 3 interviews, I think, with Rivi in 2 different facilities. And I attempted an interview at another facility in the Panhandle with Miguel Perez, another one of Griselda Blanco's alleged hitmen, who we went there and set up the interview, and he came in the room and said he's not doing. His lawyer told him not to do it. And this was after we went through all of the rigmarole of we visited him first without cameras, and we came back. We made all the arrangements through the through the prison and the warden, and we went there. We checked in all of our equipment. They searched us. They told us, you can't bring, one of our crew members had a little toolkit that had a Leatherman. Obviously, you can't bring, anything that could double as a weapon. And so we went through this whole and then set up for hours. I mean, we drove into the, pre-dawn. We drove into the Panhandle. I mean, it was this whole, and then he comes in and says, I can't do it. My lawyer said not to do it. And Alfred's like, you could have told us before we came all the way up here and set up and everything. So that was an interview that we never got.